humans, how's it going? Susan Ruth here. Thanks for listening to another episode of Hey Human Podcast. This is episode 157. I sat down with Jen and Graham Ayers at their home in Seattle, Washington, and we had a conversation about change, about seeing something that could be a problem or finding out whether it's even a problem or if it's just people talking about it, and doing something to be of service. They told me a little bit about what they did to help their community, and I was very intrigued and I wanted to do an episode on it. So that's how this came to be. Jen and Graham were in a very popular Seattle band called Honey Tongue. Jen currently is a cast member of Teatro Zanzani, where her beautiful voice can be heard as she sings and does gymnastic-y things. You know, I don't know if you've ever seen Teatro Zanzani, but it's certainly something to watch. I've been here in Seattle before, and it's a very cool show. And Graham is a manager at several of the Jack's Barbecue here in Seattle. So he is, you know, the guy that's running the ship all around the barbecue restaurants. So if you're in Seattle and you are hankering for some barbecue, they're not paying me to say this, but definitely go check out Graham's restaurants. I've known Jen and Graham for a really long time, and they're wonderful people, and I met their son for the first time on this trip to Seattle, and he is a really lovely human being, articulate, so smart, so funny, and a charmer for sure. So just a good family all around. Okay, the usual stuff, of course, social media, Hey Human Podcast on Instagram and Facebook. You can find me on social media, Susan Ruthism, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. I have my regular website, susanruth.com. You can find out all about me, my paintings and my music. I'm on iTunes under Susan Ruth. I've got so much going on. It's crazy. And of course, the podcast itself, heyhumanpodcast.com, which has a links page that I curate every week, has tons of information. Definitely check it out. It's a deep dive into whatever subject is being talked about on the show. So definitely take a gander at the old links page. The Amazon portal is also there on the heyhumanpodcast.com website. If you shop Amazon and you want to help support Hey Human, please do so through that Amazon portal there on the old website. That would be awesome. What else? You can email me, Susan at heyhumanpodcast.com. And, May 19th, if you're in Seattle, I'll be performing improv at the Pocket Theater at 7 p.m. Sunday. That's May 19th. Pocket Theater in the Greenwood neighborhood of Seattle. So come on and see that if you are around. Help support the Pocket Theater. It's I think it's like a co-op theater. So important to support those local places. Take a minute and go to iTunes and rate and review Hey Human. It's super helpful and I appreciate it. I'm very excited. I'm going to go see Endgame this week. I know I'm the last person on earth to see it. But and I've managed to avoid all spoilers, so I'm super stoked. I'm going to go with my brother and his wife to go see it on Monday. I only have a few more days of avoiding anything about the end game. So if you know me and you run into me, don't tell me a thing. I don't want to know. Okay, well, that's that. Let's get to it. Again, Jen and Graham, they're awesome. I really love what they did for their community and their local school. And for kids everywhere, really, because I think this kind of stuff, echoes out. So let's do this. Thanks for listening, everybody. Jen and Graham Ayers, welcome to Hey Human.
Thanks,
Hello.
Susan.
Very excited to have you guys on the show. I've known you both for a very long time, as we were musical buddies coming up in the music scene in Seattle.
That's right.
But you've become adults and stuff, grown up and had a kid and all that. And so just to let everybody know, I came over for brunch on, was that Saturday or Friday? Saturday. Yummy stuff, by the way.
Oh,
Very
thank you.
good.
Graham makes a mean frittata.
I do.
So good. And we started talking about your neighborhood because you live, I would say, is it the Rainier Valley of Seattle? Okay. Yes. And so this is historically known as maybe a more sketchy part of town. And you bought your house back when it was definitely considered that.
Yeah, I mean, I think that it depends on who you ask. I think it depends on what person you're asking about sketchiness.
But it's the what it was thought
considered,
of.
Yes.
Considered,
by the north end. It was considered sketchy.
Like this was the bad part of town, right? It's just like any town, any neighborhood near MLK Boulevard or any, you know what I mean? It's like, ooh, that's the sketchy part of town kind of thing.
Because there were more brown people.
Yes, people of color always makes people very nervous. So
in a city like Seattle too, that is, not really diverse, but all its diversity tends to be clustered into certain areas of town. So I would say this area of town, the Rainier Valley, has historically been the more diverse area.
Is that what you drew you to the neighborhood? Or was it the price point or?
Well, I think it was a little bit of both. I think we lived up in the Green Lake area, and I think we felt like we lived in the whitest place in the world. And we really did, when we thought about a future and maybe thought about children, definitely diversity was important to us and high on the list. And I think we had heard about the diversity down here through a couple of, was it your coworker, Jen? Who had sort of bought a house down here. And so then the price point brought us to check out houses, because this was 1997, 98, 97. And then the first home owner wave or boom. Yeah. And we thought we were priced out. None of our friends lived in this area except for this one coworker I had. So we just weren't familiar with the area. I mean, we knew Seward Park, which is a park on Lake Washington, like, a few blocks from where we live right now. So we knew it recreationally. We knew the neighborhood, but we didn't really have friends here, or socialize down here, or hang out here very much. So, we had to kind of have a conversation like, well, we move into this neighborhood. Our friends think it's an unsafe neighborhood and we don't really know a lot about it. But wow, if we have children one day, we would want to raise our family in a more diverse area and not in a very white bread neighborhood like the ones more north of Seattle, north of downtown.
Are the people that said, oh, that's an unsafe neighborhood, sort of like when I said earlier at the top of this conversation, which is, I'm saying it in jest because, ironically, but they were dead on serious. Had they really been to the neighborhood, or were they just assuming? Because I feel like a lot of times that assumption has far greater weight than the reality.
Yes, assumption. Mostly assumption, yes.
Yeah. And by the way, listeners, we're in Seattle, if you're wondering where we're talking about. My hometown.
Yeah.
So you came down here to check it out.
Yeah, we came down on an evening. We thought, well, let's spend some time in the neighborhood. And so we were like, well, let's come at nighttime. Everybody says it's so unsafe. Let's go walk the neighborhood. And that day, as we're driving down I-5, the sun was setting, and then we arrived here, and there was this beautiful sunset, and there was a couple on the street out with their baby or whatever. And I think there was like a rainbow and a pot of gold. And seriously, it was like, move to this neighborhood. It's lovely. We talked to some neighbors who'd also recently moved from the north side of Seattle, and said that they had invested in this neighborhood. They were able to get a reasonable, they were able to get more bang for their buck in their house, and they were really liking being here, and we hung out a bit, and we're like, well, we're gonna do this. This is where we want to raise our children. We don't, if we have them someday. Yeah, and I think we were excited because right across the street from us was a school, and we thought, well, this is where, if we ever have children, we don't have to drive our child to school. And there were sidewalks in this neighborhood.
Oh, the sidewalks are huge.
There aren't many in some neighborhoods of Seattle. And there was a dog park 3 blocks down where we had a dog at the time. And the house we found had this nice fenced-in backyard. So for our needs at that moment in time, and it even had a garage we knew we could convert into a studio because we're musicians, and we knew we could stop renting a practice pad and do it out of our house. So we did it.
And you're on a nice piece of land here.
Yeah,
too.
it's a big lot.
So why I'm really here, the school. So you have this school across the street.
Right.
And it's not rated highly, right? And let's talk about a little bit what you were telling me before, which got me interested in this conversation.
Yeah.
That you read message boards about it, or what? How did you?
Well, so we did have a little boy, when 2006. So he's in preschool, and we start to be more a part of our neighborhood. It's interesting what having kids will do to help you really get ingrained in your community. Because we had been touring musicians before we had our sons. So we lived here, but we were coming and going a lot. And
maybe important to add that, 2006 was probably 7 to 8 years later than when we first moved here. And I think there had been a pretty huge change in the neighborhood already in terms of perhaps gentrification. Just sort of Columbia City, which was sort of an old historic neighborhood, really took off. A lot of restaurants moved in. So there was a decent... there was a population here that I don't know.
Wider.
I was just to say.
Yeah, well, it had already grown. Yeah, it was no longer, whoa, where are you moving? But there was familiarity with Columbia City, and I think for us, we just always assumed that when you have a school across the street from us, that it would make the most sense to send your child there.
But so were you upset that it was starting to gentrify, as we know historically means get whiter, when you wanted the diversity, or was that just the nature of the beast?
Well, there's like two separate stories happening, right? There's like the story of like being a parent in your neighborhood and parenting, and then there's the issue of, why we moved to our neighborhood, what we loved about our neighborhood, and over 20 years time, which it's been now, what has happened to that neighborhood. That's a long time.
It's a long time.
It's a really long time. So kind of to speak to what Graham's saying, but also mention that we got to know our neighborhood better through being parents, because we were connected to other parents in the neighborhood, whether it's going to yoga classes or going to the local bakery, you're walking, you're in the park. I mean, we made friends in the park with our 2-year-old. So you get to know your neighbors, whether they be, the greater neighborhood. We felt more entrenched, more dedicated, more a part of things.
You were creating a tribe.
Yes.
Within the neighborhood, which I think that's such a lost art. Many people shut themselves off from their neighbors, right? And then they feel very isolated. They don't know what's going on around them. And that's not healthy, obviously.
No, and as the neighborhood,
many levels.
Exactly, and as the neighborhood shifts and changes, you really feel that if you already have investment in the neighborhood. So to ask then that other question of, what has happened to this neighborhood? I would say that we have friends who moved to this neighborhood or lived in this neighborhood in the 80s or in the 90s, and a lot of us have a different relationship with this neighborhood than people who've moved. And I'm speaking
recently.
Yeah. Especially people maybe of more privilege and more money and who have whiter skin.
Who are moving in now.
Yeah.
And I think, and adding to that dual conversation of how there are two really distinct separate issues, is gentrification brings other things that, there's restaurants. The difference maybe between gentrification and sort of building up.
It's tricky.
I mean, it's tricky because, we had, when we first moved here, there was one restaurant to eat at, and 10 years later, there was every type of cuisine to eat at.
Now there's a Whole Foods 2 miles down, which is always a big...
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And there's...
a big marker of a neighborhood becoming something.
PCC, actually. But yes.
Oh, okay. Well, that way is...
that way too.
Yeah.
Well, we actually have a PCC, which is the local kind of Whole Foods, local Seattle place in our neighborhood. Yeah,
sure.
Exactly. I think there's a shift and one of the big things I've noticed over 20 years about maybe who moved into this neighborhood and was part of the fabric of it earlier versus and I'm talking about new people moving in. I'm not talking about let's respect and value what was here before, because some of the changes that have happened in 20 years are nice. It's nice to have choice in restaurant.
Sure, of
it's
course.
Nice,
Yeah.
But I think a lot of the people like us who happen to be white and move to this neighborhood and of middle class means, because economics plays into it too. There's a social justice focus, or I don't know. We cared about the diversity here and embraced the diversity here. We go to the Rainier Valley Heritage Parade, and that is an event rich with culture and diversity. We have lots of refugees and immigrants living in this neighborhood, and it's unique. It's a unique neighborhood, and it has often felt more recently people's choices to move to this neighborhood they never factored in that it was a diverse neighborhood when they moved here. They just found a house and moved in, either because it was convenient on the light rail, which we now have, which we did not have 20 years ago, or the reputation of the neighborhood has changed. Not with everybody, but overall it's changing. So some of the people moving here now, because real estate is way crazy, right? So they maybe don't know about the history of this area and what it means to the people that have made this neighborhood what it is.
I mean, you both were hugely instrumental in changing what was going on around you. I mean, I think because you embraced it and made it okay, quote unquote, to
go to the school across the street,
to go to the school, to be in the neighborhood, to walk at night, to have, what I mean? I think, again, there's so many misconceptions about how we behave with each other.
Yeah.
Well, we have a friend who was one of the ones 20 years ago who was like, just didn't understand why we would want to move to this neighborhood and didn't really get it, and coincidentally bought a house even further south of here a few years ago. And she herself brought it up. Like, I didn't understand why you were moving there. I thought that was the dumbest thing ever. So you notice.
You lead by example, right? So we talked about this before. It's like when you shine light on places that are seemingly dark, it allows other people not only to see what's going on, but it allows them to then carry their own torch forward and do it because you've done it already, and it makes them feel safer.
Sure.
But I mean, what I loved when we were talking the other day, you were saying that this school across the street was considered a crappy school. And you said something about the message, I was getting back to that, the message boards getting really bad press, and the people were just dogging it.
I mean, amongst our community, yes. Whether it truly existed that way, whether you did shine a light in a dark cave, maybe the cave was always light to begin with, and you just were the one blind,
Absolutely. I think that's true most of the time.
Most of the time, yeah. And I think that in this case, there definitely had been amongst our peer group of mothers and fathers getting ready to send their children, their little loved one, off to school. There was definitely a reputation that, I think the first thing was, of course you wouldn't send your kid to Hawthorn. Where else would you send them? And we, in our mentality, we're right across the street, right?
Yeah.
So we're
Griffin was like 2 or 3 when this conversation first started.
Yeah.
Even in our preschool community or whatever. And then, the comments were, and now these would be like, there's an online community group called Columbia City Parents. So just like, it was a Yahoo group, right? Okay, so if you were so inclined, a lot of the refugee, exactly. A lot of the refugee immigrant populations in our neighborhood didn't even have access to computers. So let's be real about who was accessing Columbia City Parents. This is the other interesting thing. But on those groups, which we were a part of, or in our particular preschool community, or out in the neighborhood, we would hear, it's not a safe school, it's a bad school. There's a teacher there that speaks Ebonics to the kids. It has poor test scores.
This is all the
And I think what's funny is if you did do your research and looked up on numbers online and stuff, it probably didn't rank high nationally, and I think we certainly too wondered why.
But this is
at the time,
school where people sent the throwaways and the
so historically, the Hawthorn Elementary, historically back in the 80s, let's say, I think is when the new building was constructed. It was known as one of the best elementary schools in the city of Seattle. John Stanford, who so Seattle Public Schools main center is called the John Stanford Center, and John Stanford was the principal of Hawthorn Elementary back in the 80s. He was very widely known and respected, and was strong principal, strong teachers, and the children of this neighborhood went to the school. It was very highly rated, highly regarded. So in a change of leadership at the school, shortly after, the change of leadership caused teachers to leave. There was a big transition, and then families in this neighborhood started fleeing to private school. And to explain this neighborhood, aside from being very rich of diversity of culture and skin color, race, very diverse economically. So we're on a ridge here. If you go up our street, up the hill, there's views of Lake Washington and the Cascade Mountains. Homes are very highly priced. This neighborhood was built for Boeing executives. The neighborhood of Mount Baker, we're on the south end of the Mount Baker neighborhood. But then if you go a few blocks south of our home, it's a radically different neighborhood where the light posts are no longer buried underground, but are above ground with power lines. And like we're going from, let's say, back 20 years ago, the $1 million house on the bluff, the $200,000 or $100,000 house 2 blocks away with no view. Okay, so radically different, but in walking distance by 3 blocks. So a lot of those families that had invested in Hawthorn Elementary because it was their neighborhood school left and fled for private school, many of them. And when the schools are under-enrolled in Seattle and probably elsewhere in other districts, they receive less funding. So then it's this slippery slope where a school is struggling, people stop sending their kids if they can be so privileged and lucky to afford to make that choice. And then the school no longer has adequate funding for much of anything. So now the school is struggling even more. So what Seattle Public Schools did, because they had this huge building and low enrollment at Hawthorn, is they would start moving all of these specialty programs there. Refugee immigrants, when the children arrived from their country of origin and didn't speak English, they would go to a refugee program at Hawthorn for a year to learn English and then be sent to their neighborhood school. So Hawthorn received a lot of transitional kids, which is hard to build a community, especially when public schools now require, because there's lack of funding from the federal government and most state governments, public schools rely on outside funding, which generally comes from PTAs, which white privileged communities understand that model and built that model and have access to families that make enough money to support that. But in these browner communities, these less fortunate communities, they don't have that luxury. They don't have PTAs. They don't have that same support. And culturally, there's a lot of like Chinese families, for example. In China, you don't go help out at the school. You send your kid to school to be taught. You don't interfere. Mm-hmm. And America's different.
Yeah.
So there's
helicopter parents just descending upon their children.
Sure. So, I don't know, I'm getting lost.
No,
with
it's
many
okay.
Thoughts.
Well,
so the school
was thriving is now suddenly, and plus test scores matter to schools as well, right? They get funding based on that. And teaching, they get teachers based on that.
Sometimes, and this viewpoint that a school is failing. Now, was the school failing, or was the school now underfunded? Why was it failing? Underfunded, transitional, because they were also getting kids who were homeless. They were also getting kids from even more struggling communities further south. Were getting brought to Hawthorn because Hawthorn was considered a better school than their school that was 5 miles south of here. So,
let's just take a moment to go, holy shit, why is our education system so broken? There should be across the board, every neighborhood, excellent education. That's how it should be. And I know that's Pollyannic, but it's so frustrating.
It's really frustrating. It's really frustrating.
These kids should be able to eat their lunches without having to worry about it, regardless of how much money their family makes. They should be able to paint and learn music along with their science and mathematics.
Exactly. And this whole idea of failing school, I think Graham and I have come to realize that these ways that the schools are scored or test scores of children in these schools is not the best measure as to whether or not this school is successful or has good teachers.
And that's how you measure success, I guess, because in some ways one could argue that some of these test scores were taking into account so many factors of these kids were getting added. Their scores were all being factored in under one umbrella. And you could say, wow, these teachers and faculty are actually doing an amazing job given the resources that they've been given.
In Hawthorn, they were testing and including test scores of immigrant children who didn't speak English. And then comparing that to a school 8 miles north of here that's
like Mercer Island or something.
Mercer Island or the neighborhood of Madison Park, where it's primarily upper middle class white people. Those children had early education of preschool. Their parents read to them since they were out of the womb. They have two parents. Yeah. They have
There's so many factors. So many. Yeah, just based on what too. Everybody wins when children are educated. Everybody wins.
Absolutely.
Across the board.
Yeah.
It just makes the world a better place. Doesn't matter where the kids come from. I could show you, not you, but the Royal U, a list of inventors from all over the world. That's what education does.
Sure.
That have created. It frustrates me so much because I think, if you don't like immigrants, if you don't like people of other colors or cultures, then stop using basically all the things that you use in your house, in your electronics. Don't go to the doctor anymore. All these inventions that you blithely use every day, again, not you, but the Royal U, were made by people of color or somebody in some foreign land somewhere or whatever. And it's so frustrating.
It is.
You're happy to take the joys of the things that were created without honoring those who created them. Makes me crazy. Anyway, back to the story.
Well, yeah, I think for us,
and that weighs into it.
It does weigh into it, and when come back to this, you have a 2 or 3 year old and you're trying to figure out where to send him to school, and we have this elementary school literally across the street from our house, and all we heard was bad stuff from people who had never stepped foot in the school.
Isn't that always
met anyone who went to the school?
Or met anyone who went
to the school. That's always the way that it's so much easier to complain about something you don't know anything about than to actually... But see, that's what I love about y'all, because you, Graham, you and Jen, you were like, let's just go over there.
Yeah, I remember... But I think there was a particular email or thread that we were on, and I remember receiving just someone's total... I think it was just that line, like, of course you wouldn't go to Hawthorn. And I think we were sort of like, oh no, like, were we just totally wrong? Like, should we not be sending our child to Hawthorn? And as a parent, you want... and understandably, the best for your kid. You certainly want the best education possible. But there was something in those words that, I just suddenly had the time and was like, well, Jen, I'll see you later. I think she was in the middle of teaching a piano lesson or something. And I just walked out the door and went across the street and got myself signed up at the school to be a volunteer. And
without having a child there yet.
without having a child. And I think that from their standpoint, they were a little bit freaked out too. I mean, I think they were like, well, who is this person? Like,
understandably.
So they stuck me with a teacher that I think ended up just being a really great match for us. It was a second grade classroom. Her name is Cherie Turner. And she has gone on to do great things. I think she moved to Atlanta at one point in time, and Teacher of the Year awards are down there. Wonderful. But yeah, I went down there and I started volunteering once a week for just an hour. So it wasn't a substantial commitment. And what I saw was pretty much what you would expect to see at a school. I saw a lot of cute young kids, wanting to learn, and a great teacher, and all the people I met was, great faculty. But there were some definitely eye-opening things. I had been paired with a kid who had taken a particular liking to me, and he was sort of one of the, quote-unquote troublemakers in the classroom. And, he liked animals. And so one day we went to he said if it was okay for me to take him to the library, and, the teacher seemed to think that was okay. It had been after a month or two of me being there. And we went down there and walked into a library just with like a full disarray, like nothing in order or organized at all. And, there was a book that he was enjoying about animals, and I sort of said, well, let's check this book out. And, he said, well, we can't check books out. And I said, why can't you check a book out? And he said, we got to ask my teacher. So I went back to the classroom, and as we were heading off to lunch, I said, hey, how come we can't, we get a book out of the library? She's like, there's no librarian.
At a school.
At a school. There's no librarian, and, and I sort of, obviously, it was sort of a slightly in shock, and no librarian. And so then at that point, I think I also mentioned that, when I was talking to the kid about the animals, that, hey, the child had never been to a zoo before. And I thought, God, here it is, what a great experience the zoo is. And Seattle has a particularly amazing zoo. So I mentioned that to the teacher, and she sort of started talking about, hey, how the experiences of a lot of the children here are a lot different than the experiences I had growing up. So later that day, though, I got a phone call from the principal of the school, and the principal introduced herself as Sandra Scott. She said, I hear you want to go to the zoo. And I sort of laughed. She said, well, when do you want to go? You want to go this Friday? And I said, really? And she said, yeah, we'll take the whole second grade. And so we applied, and I recruited my wife and my mother-in-law as chaperones because we completed enough chaperones to go on a school field trip.
Yeah, that's the other thing. There's not as much parent support for that particular year of kids, either two working parents or one working parent. Not as much ability to have parent involvement in a society, an American society that kind of requires it for public schools these days.
Well, I just the fact that you all did this with a child not even in the school, I think that's extraordinary for a lot of reasons, but most especially it's because people talk about how I hate this, I hate that, this is wrong, this is broken, this is screwed up, this is the blah, 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 blah. But seldom do people do something.
Experience it, yeah.
Well, no, they don't do something. Yeah. You said, see you later, Jen, gonna go across the street, gonna see what this is all about. And not only did you do that and then become an active member of the volunteer staff at the school, but then you also got other people involved. You guys did. This is extraordinary in my eyes.
It was some cool stuff, and ended up being the chess teacher for the school. I started.
You did?
Yeah, I did. Yeah, they didn't have a
So cool.
they didn't have anyone to teach chess, and so we started. I started a chess club, and then.
And my mom became an artist in residence.
Talk about that. That's interesting to me.
Yeah. So once Griffin, I guess when Griffin entered kindergarten there, my mom is an artist and wanted to help. And we were like, why don't you teach art? And so she goes in and works with the kindergartners, like, I don't know, a couple times, like once a week or whatever it is. It's changed over
it's
time.
Changed, but I think what was great is she wanted Griffin. I think at the time they did have an art teacher, but I feel at the time that they didn't have sort of a one-on-one painting or some sort of class. And I felt like Claudette...
That's your mom?
Yeah, that's my mom.
Yeah, your mom. I feel like she was like, well, I want to give Griffin that experience.
Well, there was a lot of grassroots stuff going on, right?
Yeah.
Like, okay, there's a little boy that's not been to the zoo. Let's go to the zoo, right? Now, some people might say, well, I want to send my kid to a place that has the arts program already cooking, and, well, there should already be field trips to the zoo. And we were like, okay, like, our kid's going to be okay in the world. He's got 2 parents that love him up. We have a really supportive family. We have a house. We have a roof over our head. We're educated. We travel. We have the ability to take him places and go on field trips on our own. I mean, our kid at that point at age 3, he went on the field trip with the 2nd grade with us, but he'd already been to the zoo 25 times already. So we thought, there are some things lacking at Hawthorn because Hawthorn was having a rough go of it because it didn't have the support of the community. It didn't have the support of Seattle Public Schools even. It didn't have the support of our community and our neighbors. And we were like, we want to invest in our community.
So Claudette went in and said, there's no art program for...
Well, what happened is we were invited to be part of the design team of the school. So
because they saw you cared.
Yeah, so Graham had gone and volunteered, and we got to know the teachers and the administrative staff. And the principal, Sandra Scott, was somebody who had an open door. You'd call it, I've learned that you call this an open door school as opposed to a fortress school. A fortress school is one where the principal or the leadership says, we've put a little wall around this school and we handle everything. We don't need your help. We inside the walls of this school, we've got it covered. You stay out and let us get to work. Instead, her approach was the door is open. And if you want to give of your energy and time in some way, come in and share your ideas. What do you got?
That's great.
Okay, so there's like
and let it also be known, she had just arrived. So she was, I think, in her first year when I went over to volunteer. And so she then, to set the story, I think, other things that happened that year were, because it was getting near time for Griffin maybe to pick Hawthorn as his school, we had a lot of community that was curious, because I think we were very sort of definite that we had decided that maybe this would be the right choice.
And you were being
Griffin.
vocal along within the community, right? Saying these are the steps we're taking.
And this is what I see. I see a great faculty. I don't know why the test scores are this way. It looks like a great school. And Sandra said, well, hey, I'm happy to come talk to whoever wants to listen. And so one night we set up a potluck over at the school, and people from the community brought dishes and set up in the lunchroom in the kitchen and basically.
And ahead of time, I put a thing out on these community message boards like, what are your questions? What are your questions for the principal?
And there was a nice
30, 40 questions, and we gave her the questions, and we said, okay, come if you want to learn about the school instead of just bad mouthing the school. Of course, I said it in a nicer way than that. But
there's a great turnout, and
come with your questions.
Yeah,
it was quite an intense evening, though. It was a packed cafeteria of probably a couple hundred people, and there were moments that were very difficult. kudos to Principal Scott for hanging in there, because there were some very judgmental people. There were some angry people. This was at a time, now you have to remember where we were at educationally in this town. This was the year that, and this what got a lot of people upset. This was a year that Seattle Public Schools they changed their model to you go to your neighborhood school instead of you can apply to go to any school in the district, which ultimately I'm all for, because I think ultimately that helps strengthen the neighborhood school, as opposed to giving people with privilege and a voice an opportunity to flee when they don't like what they see.
Instead of changing it.
Instead of investing in the community, which makes the school stronger. Where in addition to that whole idea that you could go anywhere that they were going to get rid of, right? They have these things called option schools. The option schools, let's say every kind of greater neighborhood had an option school. This neighborhood's option school is a school called Orca. The option school was meant to be the alternative choice, but what they did when they came up with this new plan of you have to go to your neighborhood school was now it's called a geozone. We're going to put a geozone into effect. So it takes, like, maybe for us, for example, took a bunch of different neighborhoods all adjoining, and then Orca's kind of in the center of it, and it says, Orca is now your option school. So you have two choices. You can go to your neighborhood school of Hawthorn, or you can go to your option school, Orca. But catch is, we're going to put this little geozone around Orca that's like the people that live like within walking distance from Orca, and we're going to give them priority to go to Orca. But all those kids, if they wanted, could go to Hawthorn because that's their neighborhood school. But if you live outside the geozone of Orca, you have to lottery into Orca. So in effect, what they were saying is people that live in a geozone around an option school have two choices for their schools. But if you don't live in a geozone, you have one choice and you got a lottery choice. I mean, completely inequitable. I'm actually really surprised that no one has started a class action suit, and that's still in place today. So at the time that we were looking at Hawthorn and all of these other folks in the neighborhood were bashing on Hawthorn, they were all, Orca was the savior. Orca was their saving grace. But all this was changing, right? Because they were going to have to go to Hawthorn now. They couldn't apply to the schools on the north end and bus their kids like a lot of people had been doing, right? They were like, well, if we don't get into Orca, then we have to go to Hawthorn, and we're not doing that. Of course, none of them had ever stepped foot in the school.
That's when they start using their friends' addresses.
Yes.
Yeah, totally. And just to add a little color too, is that one of the other things is that Orca was way overcrowded. I mean, it had been, the classroom size was almost up to like 30 children a classroom, which is a large class.
For kindergarten.
Hawthorn, I think, was at around 14. You know, so, but it was like, I ain't going to Hawthorn. I'd rather be 31 in a classroom than have to, be.
So, again, people that see problems, well, it's that thing. It's like when you're a hammer, everything is a nail. Like, instead of actually going, oh, maybe I can do something, which is what y'all did. So tell me about the board. You were starting to say something about.
Well, so the night that we had this gathering, I think there were a lot of people just pissed off at Seattle Public Schools and taking it out on poor Sandra Scott. But they were trying, at least people showed up. People were trying to figure it out. Mm. So around that same time that the district changed these rules, the Obama administration offered schools like Hawthorn a student improvement grant, which was SIG grant, and they were grants that would be awarded for over a 3-year period, and it amounted to $1 million or more.
Which is, it goes fast, but it's still a nice chunk of money.
Huge for a school like Hawthorn that's underfunded, right? For all the reasons we talked about earlier.
And I think it allowed for some crucial things too.
It did, but what it meant in the beginning was that it was Sandra's job, the principal. She had to put together a team, which she called the design team, and they had to work through the various guidelines of this grant.
In order to get it.
It was part of the process of receiving the money.
Which, if anyone's gone through the grant process,
Well, so this is post-grant. So the grant has been awarded.
Oh, how did the award come to be then?
Well, that's a good question. Did Seattle Public Schools apply for those on behalf of the schools that were struggling, or did the schools themselves apply?
I don't even know if it was something set up through, like maybe even so, maybe they just might have been granted.
Done via test scores. It might have been done via the rating of the schools.
Sure.
There's 3 of them within either Seattle or Washington.
West Seattle Elementary, Hawthorn, and Cleveland High School. Yeah. So the grant was awarded, and then we had to go through these steps to get everything in line for the money to arrive. So Sandra asked us to be on the design team as representatives from the community. Yeah. There were people from Seattle Public Schools on that design team, teachers from Hawthorn, and we met over a course of several months, bi-monthly or whatever it was, and we had a list of tasks that we had, questions we had to answer, and we had to create the vision for what Hawthorn was going to be.
What did that look like to you?
One of the main components was a performance art focus. Sandra Scott is an African-American principal. She had a school rich with diversity, and although, I think, and she talked about this specifically, that there often had been in schools in inner cities that had a lot of children of color, there was often that push to get rid of arts and music to really help give kids who are more disadvantaged economically an advantage and just really focus on academics. And it was Principal Scott's belief, and those of us on the design team, it was our belief that we could really enhance the education and actually make it stronger by having the performance art component. And she envisioned a program that would enable, and it's actually what the school became, which is a focus on STEM plus the arts, which is called STEAM. So the acronym is STEAM, A for arts, where kids all learn differently. And so if you create a system, you have an educational system that can use arts and help meet kids where they're at. Like, some kids are visual learners, some kids are auditory learners, some kids are tactile, whatever it is. There can be a unit on spiders, and some kids are drawing the spiders to learn about them, and some kids are giving an oral presentation to learn about them, or, some kids are building a spider out of whatever, right? So the main design of it was that there was going to be a large component of enrichment, and not just art, but other things. As much enrichment as she could bring into the fold, right?
Yeah.
Powerful learners, powerful.
Which was an after school. Well, and there was. Oh, yes, yeah. I don't remember. God, it was a lot of work to get there. It's a lot of years ago, too.
We had to brand the school. It was like what a business does, right?
Yeah. Sure.
And there was a big component on look, we've got this school rich with diversity. Let's honor it. Let's celebrate it. Our focus is to bring all these kids in the fold.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that was the success of the school was a unique balance of maybe 3 to 4 really necessary factors, which was, I have to say, the school had already in place a great faculty. Now, they were able to add where they were lacking, which was a librarian, an art teacher.
And they did have a paid art teacher, not just my mom.
Yeah, and then they also had Eileen Gray was brought in.
So we created a position with some of the money, which was so Principal Scott hired a business officer, she was really the vice principal. Her name was Eileen Gray, and she was a principal at a local parochial school for a while. And so basically Hawthorn had two principals.
Yeah. And they got along great. They had a shared vision.
Which also speaks to their character, because instead of being adversarial, which some people would take that, there's going to be 2 of us, they were in conjunction. They
were. And I think one of the difficult elements of, and I don't know if it was just the grant or just the way that the city was moving, but Sandra ended up down at the Board of Education, down at the city explaining herself she was gone half the time having to answer to other people. Well, at the same time, you then had another principal in place who took care of the kids.
I feel like this is a movie in the making.
It was amazing. And so you had this amazing faculty and principal, and I think the principal is like having a great quarterback on a football team, and then you had
amazing kids,
and you had well that's right, you had a whole set of community of parents who were not just the type of parent to drop their kids off, but were all giving of their time. And so the whole neighborhood took pride and ownership. And so then behind it all was a bunch of kids.
Not yet though. Not in the beginning.
Well, I mean, it grew. It grew, but I mean, there was a lot of care right from the get-go.
Well, those of us who invested in Hawthorn from, let's say, from all the people, let's say, from the message boards, right, that maybe look like Graham and I, the white middle class families who we all had kind of a similar, we might be from different states, but we all went to college and we were doing okay for ourselves. That group, right? A small group of families sent their kids to Hawthorn and really got to work at helping raise money. One of the things Eileen Gray did was help us start an auction because Sandra saw that we needed to raise additional funding because that was the system.
Fast, yeah.
And also,
well, the realization was that after 3 years, the money runs out.
Yeah.
And so you need to be self-sustaining for the future.
Right.
And so.
Right. We did as much as we could to not be kind of preachy, annoying people on our soapbox. Like we just wanted to share our experience. And so we would just open our home or put together potlucks at the community center.
But you had cocktail parties here and things.
We would invite people. We would put things out on message boards and flyers and word of mouth, and we would say, interested in, if your child, we're going to have just like a social for Hawthorn. So if you're interested in learning about the school and what's going on there and you have questions. And, I think the first time we did it was really intense. It was like people were more there like freaked out that they were maybe gonna at the thought that they maybe were gonna have to send their kid to Hawthorn, but then also finding comfort in the fact that there were some of us that were like, it's gonna be okay. There's good stuff happening. There's great kids and there's great teachers and there's amazing principal. Over the time that Griffin was there from kindergarten to 5th grade, I would say by the time he was in 5th grade, one of those parties we had, it was more just like no one even asked about the school. They came and ate our food and drank our drinks and
chilled and had
fun. That was it.
Yeah.
It was like, oh. And so And
I think one thing that is left out a lot of these discussions that you guys keep bringing in is that children want to learn.
Yes.
They're curious-minded. They're excited. Everything is new and interesting. If given the opportunity to grow in that environment, they will. That's just the nature of the way a child's mind works. So I assume taking those kids to the zoo, the ones that had never been to the zoo, I can't even imagine the joyfulness that surrounded that day to see how kids responded.
It was great. But in some ways, I don't know if it was more for us or for them.
I don't know. It was really
because
fun.
Life goes on. It was. It's hard. Sometimes it's hard for me to talk about because I feel like, on the one hand, I feel like, so maybe we were some of the first white people to jump into the pool.
Right.
And we dove.
So do you feel weird about being white in those cases?
I feel like there was so much history and care before I took that leap. The pool was there the day before, and people were in it, and there were teachers there that had already given years of their life to every day, and to them, they thought it was a great school. I mean, did they need more resources and more money and stuff? Yes, but were they like they weren't like these
They hadn't
miserable,
given up,
unhappy
yeah.
people, and suddenly
It's
white
why
people
we sent
came.
we sent our kid there, because we saw firsthand that's what the core was there. We saw loving teachers. We saw earnest kids.
You put a face on it that, of course, other faces that look like your face could align with. Mm-hmm. So that's it.
And I
that's
think
an unfortunate reality.
It was, and I think what was true is that we did bring parents that lived in our zip code, that had time and energy to put into school. Yes. We brought a caring group of people to our school that allowed the school to have that stability from year after year. There was a kid who was going to start in the first grade and was going to graduate in the fifth grade. And I think that brought a lot of peace of mind, because along the way, Seattle public schools tried to screw it all up. They tried to take the teacher, the principal away. They tried to take borders and redraw things. But what they had behind it was a community to speak for Hawthorn, which was not there before. Before, Hawthorn just had to roll with whatever punches Seattle public schools threw at it. And so, it was there was people at the Seattle public schools who actually bashed Hawthorn. Yes. I think there were people that were like, well, I would never send my kids there. Yes. Kind of thing.
There were
and now the school has seen awards from other places besides the SIG. You said Target gave an award, and
Target gave Hawthorn a library improvement grant,
which is so cool.
It was so cool.
And it restructured
$50,000 to completely revamp and restock, and iPads and the whole bit.
Boy, did we have one happy librarian too. It was pretty psyched.
The National Principals Association awarded Miss Scott an award and gave us a brand new playground. And all these principals from all over the country came, and the kids got to vote on the colors, and we got to break ground. And it was a real exciting ride, I would say, because that there was just really excited energy and commitment of people who really cared about the school and cared about the kids. And I think
I love that it's a hawthorn tree, because when you look at a hawthorn tree, it's a beautiful tree, but it's covered in thorns. So to get on the outside of it, it's very thorny and slightly dangerous, But getting underneath it, once you get inside, it's this beautiful canopy. There's all this space. You could stand up. It's beautiful. It's such a lovely metaphor. I just love that it's named Hawthorn. I really do. I love that.
It's pretty cool. The National Education Association came to give Hawthorn some awards during this period, and what Hawthorn was known for is one of the most successful SIG grant schools of all the schools in the nation.
Wow.
So a lot of schools received the money and made some great changes, and then were not able to sustain. And so the Education Association would come and ask us, well, what was different about Hawthorn?
And I think that spoke to those factors.
And that's what Graham was just speaking to. It was like it was the perfect storm of the right leadership, the right teachers, the right kids, and the right community. At the same time, all working together.
And then money.
And money.
That's, for sure. Money.
And the money,
So for people listening who maybe their schools are struggling, or maybe their schools are fine and they see other schools around them struggling, any advice that you might give to them?
Well, it's interesting. When Griffin was in preschool, before we kind of started this journey, I remember a friend of mine saying, "Oh, you have the moxie and the resources to get your kid in wherever you need to get him in." And I was like, "Yeah, you're right." Meaning, you could go to whatever private school, or you could find the money, you could work the system, you could call upon the people to get whatever you want for your kid. And, we took a very different path ultimately. Instead of that, we invested in, in ourselves, in our neighborhood. We invested in what was here, and it was not always easy. It was we look back on it, and I'm just so grateful that we made the decisions we made and that we lucked out to be part of such a great community, because it really is. Hawthorn community is like a family to us, but we could have easily missed out on that opportunity by not being willing to challenge ourselves. I mean, working through what we did was not easy. It was not always comfortable. I mean, there was even a teacher at Hawthorn who was mistrustful for a long time about a lot of the new families that had come in who were not families of color, and we understood and respected her. I mean, her feeling was, this school is great, we don't need your help. And by the 4th year, I remember sitting at a table with her, and we sat down and we said, Miss Mack, what do you need? We know you're the expert in knowing like what the kids need for these events that you do and you help. What do you need? How much money do you need to do this? And she told us, and we filled her name in on the line for the PTA funding, and her face just lightened up. And I sat with her and with my mom, and she was like, she had a complete change of heart of like, oh, I thought you were coming in to change it. I thought you were coming in to try to take over. And I realized it's not at all what you all were doing. You were coming in to be a part of the community. And it was really powerful. Really powerful.
Yeah, I think that's great. I think your message of what can I do for you as a parent to the faculty. I mean, at the end of the day, you have to believe that they're teachers, and that they're doing the right thing for the kids, and maybe sort of step back and say, hey, how can I be of assistance to you? Is a really I think that's good advice.
You're coming from a place of privilege. It's really easy to say, this is what I want from you. Give me this. I need this. And
or I know better than you, or
I know better than you.
Sure.
And when you come from a place, like Graham said, of
how may I serve?
Yeah.
And it's a conversation. It's
not an easy one.
It's not an easy one. And I think back, I was sort of, thinking how one may argue that Hawthorn is a success, but I think even having spent my life as an artist, and I think you may relate to this too, Susan, is that someone may perceive the success and think, wow, like what an easy road it was to get there, but they miss so much of the background, and it's getting in there. It's not overnight. I mean, it's a lot of it's slow.
It's 10,000 miles.
It's the journey.
It was a journey, and there was a lot of it. It's nice to reflect back on his education and say, wow, that really worked. And when in talking to Griffin, it feels like it did. He really has great memories of his.
He's a very smart and engaging child as well. So that speaks well of you, obviously, but it also speaks well of his teachers and his educators, for sure. Thank you so much, Jen and Graham. Thank you. I just, when you started telling me this story, I wanted to get it out so much. It meant a lot to me, because as cliche as it is, the children are, go Whitney Houston, our future. And it's true. And they are worth our time. They're worth our investment. They are worth our love and understanding.
But all the kids, not just the ones that we birthed.
No, of course. All the kids.
Right.
Exactly. All the kids.
Exactly.
All of them. Because you don't know what that kid's going to grow up and become. And if we do our jobs right as humanity, as people of humanity, those children will grow up and give back to the world. And it's all symbiotic, all of it. This is not an us against them.
No.
We're all in it.
Yep.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Bye, everybody. Hey, thanks for listening, everybody. Take a moment and go to iTunes and rate and review Hey Human. Thanks. Bye.